Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to BII. Thank you very much. My name is Leslie Marsthorpe, and literally my first week as the new CEO of British International Investment. I'm very proud to be joined with so many of my colleagues and many of the people who were actually pioneers in putting together what we are celebrating here today. Before we start, there's just a few people who I really need to single out to all of you. Firstly, the former CEO of what was then the CDC, but who was really the leader of the firm at the time, Diana Noble, is here, and want to acknowledge her presence as one of the part of the brains trust of what we will be celebrating here today. We also have Yasmin Lamy here, who was one of the people who in fact came up with the name of the Catalyst portfolio. We have Laurie here, one of the leaders of impact investment more broadly in the world today, but also one of our board members, and I want to give them a special word of welcome. One of the things that really attracted me as a development finance practitioner to BII has really been the desire to want to be pioneering and innovative and cutting edge and look and search for new solutions. I mean, this firm has demonstrated that not only under Diana's reign, but also under Nick O'Donoghue over the last 7 years. And that's really the spirit that I hope that we will preserve within BII as we search for ways in which we can be more impactful and the way in which we can use our toolkit in more imaginative ways as we go forward. The scale of the development challenges are large, as we all know, so we're constantly looking for ways of doing new things. And that was really the context within which Diana Noble and the team came up with the Catalyst portfolio. BII, as you know, is mainly known for investing in private businesses, trying to make both a financial return and development impact, and sort of growing companies. And in fact, that broad portfolio is called the growth portfolio. But 10 years ago, the idea was born that we should create a separate pool of capital where we take on even higher risk, where we in fact sort of raise the bar and the threshold. And that's really what Catalyst portfolio has been about over the last decade. So we're here today to really celebrate the teams who have done this, to celebrate the successes, and then also to launch the report, which we'll hear about a little bit more later. You know, it's often important as we look at what we do through the lens of what is the real impact. And through Catalyst, we've committed $1.6 billion of capital to 91 businesses. We've created over 108,000 jobs, contributed to 324,000 megawatt hours of renewable power. So ultimately, this is how we want to touch and feel what we do. So those numbers speak volume. We're also very pleased today to have with us the CEO of MedAccess, Michael Anderson, who will be a panelist here. MedAccess is a company that was created by BII, and it plays a very, very critical role in providing patient access to life-changing medical supply. So this is the kind of pioneering catalytic sort of investments that is really having a huge transformative impact through our work. The second key point I'd like to just leave you with is that it's so important for us to sort of codify what we do, codify best practices, because we're all part of, BII is just one actor amongst many. But it's very important that we sort of learn lessons, codify them, see what else we can learn. We do that by working very closely with the likes of EBRD, with IFC, with FMO, with Proparco, all of our peers. So this report will go into that sort of reservoir of knowledge as we build the overall sort of knowledge architecture of development finance. So we're very pleased to hear from some experts here today. So I will, in a few moments, hand over to the chair. Where's Jessica? Yeah, sitting right here in front. Jessica Pothering, as we all know, is the editor of Emerging Markets, editor for ImpactAlpha, and she's going to lead us through the session, and she's kindly agreed to chair. Before I hand over to Jessica, there's just a few thank yous that I'd like to extend. Firstly, to Stephen Aris and Chris Dartsmith, who were the two co-authors of the report. And there's a number of people who played a vital role throughout this period and also contributed to the report, specifically Sarah Taylor, Zara Khan, and Sarah Marchant, who are all from BII. And then finally, of course, FCDO for their input and ongoing support. Also want to sort of thank them. So let me now hand over you in the safe hands of Jessica. Jessica Pothering, please, over to you.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Laurie, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to come up, and then I'll have a quick introduction. Hi, everybody. I'm really pleased to be here today. I'm, as Leslie so kindly introduced, I'm the Emerging Markets Editor for ImpactAlpha. We're an impact investing media organization, for those of you who don't know us. And this is a special opportunity to have this conversation because ImpactAlpha has been following BII's progress, particularly around its catalytic capital tools and the Catalyst portfolio, really since the beginning. I was looking back through our coverage as I was preparing for this discussion, and I remember Yasmin wrote a piece for us in 2019 just about the ambition and the mission of this catalytic portfolio at BII, then CDC. And she cited that $500 million had been deployed at the time in 2019, and that the goal by 2020 was $1.5 billion. Of course, we all know that the pandemic happened, and now BII is at $1.6 billion. But I remember thinking at the time, I was like, 500 million, that's a lot for impact investing, for catalytic capital. I mean, now, of course, we've seen the space evolve. We see billion-dollar impact funds coming into the market. And yet, from where I sit in our emerging markets coverage, there really are very few actors who are trying to deploy catalytic instruments at this kind of scale. And particularly in the development finance world, I think BII really stands out among its peers, not only with the type of experimentation and risk-taking and work that you're doing, but also with your openness in sharing the lessons. And so I think this discussion is obviously speaks to that, but I feel honored to moderate this conversation and to introduce Laurie Spengler, who is not only a friend of ImpactAlpha, but also on the board of BII and operates in many other capacities in impact investing. And Laurie, I wanted to start this discussion with you. You've been on the board, I think, since 2017, is that right?
July of 2017, yes.
And so you've followed this journey from the very early days of Catalyst, and so maybe you can just share a little bit at the top for everybody in the room about what you've seen and how this facility has not only transformed what's happening in the impact world, but also in development finance and at BII as an organization.
Fantastic, thank you. And it's great to be with you, Jessica. Thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm so glad, Leslie, that you recognized Diana, the previous Diana Noble, prior CEO, and Yasmin, really the architect in many ways of what we see now today in the Catalyst portfolio. So really grateful to be here. I think of me as the board champion. I was the board Catalyst champion from the very beginning. So I arrived July of 2017 when Catalyst, as you'll see in the report, had moved from an off-balance sheet kind of experimentation onto an on-balance sheet initiative and really part of our capital portfolio at BII, and I've been part of that journey ever since. And I just want to say I'm just so delighted to have this moment to look back and to ask ourselves, what have we learned? Because there's always more to do, but I also think it's important when you've been working so hard in the trenches to pause and to reflect and say, okay, wow, we have achieved something. You just referenced the size and scale, but what have we learned along the way? And then how can that inform us going forward? So I think at that time, around 2017, impact investing was becoming, as you know, because you covered it, more mainstream. More and more pockets of investors, more and more types and stripes of investors were talking about impact investing. And I think as a development finance institution, part of the challenge of the mandate is always to be able to push the boundaries of your sandbox. Because there's so much more to be done in the markets we are serving, the markets we're investing in, for deep inclusion, greater sustainability. And so our portfolio, our core portfolio, if you will, was something we were very proud of, definitely an impactful portfolio. But we were asking ourselves, what could we do differently to expand the boundaries of that sandbox? And we looked at risk and impact in particular as levers to expand the sandbox. And coming onto our core balance sheet, what we recognized is we needed to have a clear rationale and a purpose of why we're doing this, but also a discipline of approach. And we'll get into a little bit of that in our conversation. But I think it's important to recognize there was no pushback as to whether or should we do this. I think there was just a real excitement that we are in our markets. We are recognizing there are some deals that we are not doing, some deals that we are turning down, some deals that we're not quite comfortable with because they're just too new. Sometimes I call it the too many news. New geography, new model, new manager, new solution. It's too many news. And so we were not quite comfortable that we had the track record, the data points to actually analyze the risk. And I think it's important, and Yasmin's initial paper wrote about this so effectively. It wasn't as if we were assuming that taking more risk would necessarily yield a lower financial performance. It was the uncertainty of risk that we were trying to get our arms around and give license to the investment officers to pursue that risk, looking for more impact and giving a little bit more tolerance on the financial expectations in order to do that. But it really was the uncertainty of risk that was the hallmark, I would say, of Catalyst out of the gate.
It was quite a shift, right? Because really a lot of the impact at BII was focused around investing in other funds. And then this initiative helped broaden that whole toolkit and sort of got people to think about different instruments that can be, that could be effective in the market, supporting market building. And that's quite a big shift. I mean, I know the size of the team changed at the time, and there was a lot of expansion within BII generally, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit on some of the specifics of, how those changes transpired and what mechanisms the board and others used to kind of ensure that this program was staying on track and doing what it was meant to do and continuing to push those boundaries.
Yeah, no, those are great points, Jessica. I would say, and the report does speak to this, BII, or CDC in the day, and now BII, was on a tremendous trajectory of growth. And when Diana Noble was here, and then Nick O'Donohoe coming in right after, we were pivoting from a fund of funds into a multi-instrument development finance institution. And you're absolutely correct that our notion of Catalyst was that we were not going to restrict it to a single instrument. We wanted it to apply and track across the totality of our instruments, again, to be most responsive to our market needs and market opportunities. So that was really important out of the gate. And we didn't want to silo this as you would just have one part of the organization that, well, we do a little catalyst over here, but the rest of the organization isn't affected by that. So those were some of the architectural considerations that we put in at the very beginning. I would say I've alluded to it, the alignment I think was so critical among shareholder, board, and management. There was real alignment, and we really asked ourselves this notion of risk, greater risk in pursuit of deeper inclusion, more sustainable impact. So that kind of rationale was very clear. But then in the terms of the hows, what I reflected on, Jessica, in preparing for this conversation as well, is that I think establishing a center of excellence that was championed and led by Yasmin. So we did have some people in the organization, especially early on, that you could go to try to ask, is this a Catalyst deal? Does this look like more risk? How do we actually think about that? If we don't have the typical track record and indicators, how do we actually underwrite for that? There was a lot of iterative learning, and you absolutely needed some people in the organization who woke up every day thinking about Catalyst across the instruments, across geographies, across sectors. But at the same time, we were very clear that we wanted to embed it, because we were allergic to this notion of if we just silo it, it's going to stay siloed. So it's that combination of how do you develop a center of excellence with deep experience and expertise, but also embed and expand across the organization. And I'm going to use that word again, it was iterative. It wasn't completely sequential, but that was, I think, a determination that we had from the beginning and challenged ourselves both as board and management to pay attention to that. We augmented the notion of you needed expertise at the IC table. We have Anne-Marie Harris in the audience as well, who's an IC member, a Catalyst IC member. So your investment committee. You also need, when you come to investment committee, if you're doing something new and different, the same investment committee members need someone in addition who has perhaps another expertise to interrogate the transactions, especially for that enhanced development impact, because that was what we were in pursuit of, was the enhanced development impact. And it was new as we're doing this. We don't have a bunch of data points yet. So that, I think, was a really helpful point as well. And then Leslie used this in his opening remarks, trying to codify as we were going. What does enhanced development impact mean, and what does it look like? How does it show up in different opportunities as we're investing? I think that actually also gave people confidence and a sense of success, and also gave the board confidence that there is something actually different here that we are doing. Our sandbox is expanding, and we're doing deals that we previously weren't doing before.
I want to come back to the point you made about how this wasn't just siloed within BII, because I think, from my own experience as a reporter, I often see that there are these allocated pockets of money in different organizations for concessional finance, for first loss finance, that are trying to push the boundaries of what, especially in emerging markets where everyone talks about how hard these deals are, trying to push the boundaries of impact and drive more capital into markets that it wouldn't go to otherwise. But then there's a real risk that experimentation gets stuck in that silo, right? And I think what is interesting here is, from what I've seen in talking to various team members and reading the report, is how the experimentation that's happened in the Catalyst portfolio has really percolated, throughout the rest of BII as an institution. And I just wonder, if you could speak a little bit to how you've seen that, and like what some of the takeaways are maybe for other institutions that would like to try and do something similar.
Well, I mean, first and foremost, as a board member, it's a tribute to management, because it's never a single person. It is the culture of the organization that the board hopefully encourages, stimulates, supports, but it's absolutely the professionals who show up every day, who have just a real depth of curiosity. They want to learn from each other and compare. What are you finding? But I would say, as a board member, apart from the cultural aspects and the tribute to the individuals, I do think BII, when we shifted to really see ourselves as a solution-driven organization, so when we were pivoting out of a fund of funds, we actually were very focused, and we needed to be focused on our products, because we were moving beyond fund of funds into direct equity, direct debt. You need a discipline and execution capability to develop those muscles. And then with our last strategy period, we were very intentional about shifting to, we are a solutions-driven investment entity. So you go into a market, you don't know yet, is that growth? Is that catalyst? Is that debt? Is that equity? Is it a fund? You don't know necessarily. You're trying to be really responsive to what does this market opportunity, or how does it present, and how can we as a DFI be most responsive to that market opportunity and market need? And I think that really helped build out that notion of, since we don't know when we show up if it's going to be growth or catalyst, or now kinetic, or our newer pot of capital, we don't know, that you really want to make sure that you are talking across the organization and learning. And I think the second, Jessica, is structurally by embedding and not having just, yes, you have expertise in the organization. I don't want to suggest that we don't. But when you literally put it in an isolated box, you do limit yourselves. We recognize that would be messy, and I think we all know at times, there's when you're learning new things, there's a blurriness sometimes. The growth, the catalyst delineation, there's a blurriness. But we had this healthy willingness to interrogate and ask a series of questions. So I would say management's commitment, the individuals who are deeply curious, but being a solutions-driven investor, I think has really helped embed and solidify that approach and the sharing of catalyst learnings into growth, into Connecticut and beyond.
I think one of the things that I hear a lot is that the role of development finance institutions should be to be more catalytic, to take more risk, to help markets develop and move. And we're coming into this really critical time. You know, the world has set this 2030 agenda for ourselves, and the climate crisis is not going to adhere to a 2030 agenda, right? It's going to keep going regardless. And the markets that BII is working in and serving are some of the most vulnerable to economic shocks, to climate shocks. So there is this real sense of urgency at the moment about building new markets, getting more capital.
Yes.
What do you see the role of, why is this type of work, I guess, important for DFIs to do, and what would you like to see, you know, from the many other hats you wear in the impact space? Like what would you like to see catalysts in this work at BII go next, and what would you like to see from other DFI peers?
Wow, more.
Yeah,
Answers more. So, gosh, it's a lot in there, Jessica. Let me try to tease out a couple of key points. You're absolutely right. The mandate of a development finance institution is more relevant today, perhaps, than when they were set up at their foundation, for all the reasons that you've alluded to in your questions. So the relevance of our mandate is just front and center, and with that comes a deep responsibility to execute on that mandate very well with a multiplicity of tools. And that's why I do think the catalyst, growth, kinetic capabilities are so important inside a development finance institution. I wish others had it. I will give a shout out to our shareholder, because it does take an aligned shareholder to actually create the parameters to have those capital pools. A lot of people in the industry, and look, I'm in the industry in addition to being on the board of a DFI and care deeply about DFIs, but we often hear the criticism that development finance institutions need to do more, but they can't do more by themselves. They absolutely need an aligned shareholder. And so we do need to acknowledge that helped us tremendously. And I hope other shareholders and bilateral DFIs could have a similar conversation as we were able to have here, and we would like more of that, I will say. So that's kind of one point. I think the second is, how do you use it then? And I think for us, our Catalyst portfolio, and hopefully you'll see this in the examples that are spoken about on the panel, it has been our New Horizons bucket. It has been the way that we've pushed the boundaries of that sandbox. You know, when we started out, things like, you know, financial inclusion and infrastructure development, those were becoming very familiar to investors. And we've pushed beyond into, you know, ag tech. You see these examples in the report. We've pushed the boundaries there. And I think that's exactly why you want to be using that type of capital. We talk about mobilization a lot now. How do we mobilize other pots of capital, other pools of private capital, because we don't have enough of development finance institutional capital to solve the challenges. And I think oftentimes there are two ways to mobilize capital. Sometimes it's simultaneous. So the billion-dollar transactions you referenced, the SDG loan fund, that's in a single transaction. At the same time, you're going to have a development finance institution and institutional capital. There's also sequential mobilization, where a development finance institution is paving the way by example, by leadership, by pioneering, by testing, by learning, by failing. And that, to me, is as powerful, as important as the simultaneous mobilization. And I think for us, the Catalyst pool has allowed us to take those steps to find new things, new models, new strategies, test, innovate. And the one thing I do want to emphasize is we've been willing to do it at both a deal level and what the report calls, and you're going to hear from Michael, a platform level, where we really see a market failure. And we've stepped in where, honestly, I don't think any other development finance institution would go to put equity capital into standing up a new solution in the face of an abject market failure. I don't want to steal Michael's thunder. You'll hear about MedAccess. But the other one is GridWorks that we've done. And transmission and distribution in Africa, no one was investing in transmission and distribution. There was no pathway to do it. And so to be bold in doing that, recognizing a high degree of uncertainty, and you can't do that in its entirety, which is why we do call it a Catalyst portfolio. It's a portfolio, and I really believe that we are underutilizing the portfolio allocation tool, both as development finance institutions and as institutional investors. everything can't come down to one deal, a binary up or down, yes or no question. You have to actually expand the aperture of decision making, and I think by looking at deal and market level, by looking at a catalyst allocation within our overall total capital allocation, I think has given us much more independence, much more autonomy, much more conviction about taking some of those risks, and I'm proud we've done it.
I think, yeah, because you're the portfolio level approach, as you were talking, I mean, I think what this has done, I know the goal here was impact first, capital preservation, so that it could be recycled into new markets, into new instruments, into new experimentation. But that's looking at it from a portfolio level really does give the team working here the ability to try new things, right? Because one failure isn't the end of the game, right? It's just it's one thing that didn't go well, and that along with that will ultimately be numerous other wins or discoveries, right? That where you find out that your capital can be applied again.
Exactly, and it does take the discipline of management and the board to have that conversation. Of course, you need to look at the individual investments within the portfolio, and that's part of our job. But strategically, you've got to frame the conversation with portfolio parameters, and that I think we've evolved and we've grown in our capabilities to do that.
What do you, just as a final question, I think is, what do you think the lesson here, the takeaway for others in the impact space, particularly investors who want to be more catalytic with the tools that they're deploying, or see themselves as impact first investors? What do you think the lesson here is from some of the learnings from BII?
I think you're going to gain far more than you lose. That people go in with this defensive posture and worry about what I'm going to lose. I mean, you do have to decide what your tolerance is. And when we were modeling it out at the beginning, we had a certain risk tolerance, and we were clear about that in an organization. So you do need to be, you do need to ask and answer that question for yourself as an institution. That said, you will gain so much institutionally if you do it in some of the ways we talked about, that center of excellence with the embedding, with the additional expertise that you can bring in. But I look now at not just the deals we're pursuing that we wouldn't have done before. We've shifted in how we even look at risk. So some of the examples in the report, Omnivore Fund 1 and 2 would have been catalyst. Omnivore 3, it's growth. Like that's a great, it's market development for them, but it's also a shift in how we look and underwrite that risk. The enhanced development impact, our ratings, our scoring system today on impact for every transaction at BII is absolutely better, stronger, more systematic because of the enhanced development impact muscles we built with Catalyst. So that's an institutional gain by actually dialing it up in one part of your portfolio. I also think it's created a greater readiness to take on additional pools of capital. So we alluded to this kinetic, it's mentioned in the report. I mean, that's exciting because we now, and we have the confidence that we know how to do this. So you gain capability, confidence, and a bigger investment pool that aligns with your ultimate objective, which is pursuit and realization of impact.
Just to elaborate on Kinetic, it's a blended finance vehicle, right? That is actually taking even more risk than the catalytic portfolio. So
we're out on the risk spectrum, even more. Yes,
right, exactly. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. And I think Sarah, I think someone's going to speak a little bit about Kinetic. I think you will. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Laurie. I think this has been a great conversation, and we're going to get even more into some of those learnings and the examples in the panel discussion. So,
well, thank you, Jessica. Thank you. And it's such a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Well articulated.
I'd like to call up Maria and Michael, and I think we're getting Raghu to join us online, right? Okay. Good to see you too. Did you just get? Oh, hi, Raghu. Raghu is there. Okay, I was wondering where to look. Super. I have Maria here is with BII. Michael's with MedAccess, one of the platforms that Laurie mentioned that we'll be talking about, and we have Raghu online, one of the one of the portfolio companies from Catalyst, who he works with LoadShare in India, and he's joining us virtually. So this is, Laurie and I spoke, about the evolutionary process of Catalyst and what that has done within BII. And I'm excited about this conversation because we'll get into a lot of the sort of granular details of those learnings. Maria, I think you've really seen how BII's strategy has evolved through Catalyst, and I know you have a personal point of view on that. So I would actually like to just start and where you can share a little bit on actually working on some of the specifics of the deals and what this actually looks like within the organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a unique perspective for two reasons. One is my current role here at BII as Chief Impact Officer. So I see how this pool of capital has really been driving the most impact that we have across our portfolio. But for the first decade I was at BII, I've been here for 12 years now, I was a user of Catalyst because I was on the investment team. And because I've been here for 12 years, I also joined during this moment in time, which Laurie explained, which was our pivot. And I've just seen Diana in the audience, which is great. So when Diana joined, the portfolio that we had was a private equity fund of funds. And it was all very new and exciting that we were doing direct equity and some direct debt. And these were new products. But we had a total portfolio that we were looking at with the same, return thresholds. And, over the years, it became very clear that in order to be supportive of the needs of our markets and the specific needs of our investees, we needed more flexibility. And, today we have this fantastic toolkit and spectrum of things that we can provide, and much of what's just been spoken about. I mean, we've got different types of debt products, mezz. We could use blended finance. But Catalyst was the first of that kind, right? And as a user of Catalyst, when this pot of capital was introduced, it really did shift a mindset and a culture internally, right? It allowed us to think about things more innovatively. It allowed us to, support our investees more specifically to what they needed. And so it's been great to see that expand into even higher risk pools of capital over time.
Just for framing, can you share where what was the size of the allocations through the fund of funds and versus where we are now at 1.6 billion with Catalyst alone?
Yeah. So when we started with what was the number that we started with? I should have. 75. There we go, Sarah. Hello, you were with us. Yes. So we started with $75 million, and it felt like a lot of money, I think, at the time. And I'm sure the board and some of Exco at the time was quite terrified of that. So today we're at $1.6 billion, over 100 investees. We've created over 100,000 jobs, but we've also preserved capital. I mean, this is the beauty of it, right? Is that this was touched on in this last session, is that because we can look at it from a portfolio perspective, we'll have some winners. And I was involved in one of the first investments that we made in Veritas. And at the time, we didn't do pre-profit businesses, and it felt like a really unique style of lending. And
what does
Veritas is an SME lender in India. Okay. But at the time, we didn't do anything pre-profit as an organization. We were a growth investor, and so investing in this business felt quite risky. And then this is a great example because over the years, we actually graduated that investment from Catalyst to our growth portfolio because it became profitable and it became scaled. And we hope we see more examples like that over time. But no, I mean, the portfolio, now, we set a target internally to be 15% of our portfolio, but we're at closer to 20%. Right. And so it's been remarkable.
20% was actually, that was news to me, actually, and I was surprised to learn that it's such a substantial share of the portfolio. And I don't know what BII's goals are in terms of growing that, or if 20% is sort of the comfortable allocation at this point. But I do know, with this expansion of these other tools like Kinetic, the organization is thinking about going into these new areas and what other risk opportunities to take risk, experiment, proof markets there are. And you had mentioned this culture of experimentation. Can you say a little bit more about maybe an example or two from the portfolio aside from Veritas and how that's materialized?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the platforms, and I spent some time in DC in the fall with a variety of other impact investors, and one of the things that I came back thinking is that we have really become known in the market for our ability to take risk in these platforms. So Laurie just alluded to, and I'm teeing up Michael nicely here for MedAccess, but actually there's been quite a few. So GridWorks was mentioned, which is a transmission and distribution platform that we set up in Africa because we saw that there was a development need. And that's really what Catalyst is always meant to be about, right? Which is, where is there a market failure, a development need in our markets? And it's a pool of capital that allows us to take the risk to set up a permanent investment vehicle or a platform from scratch that we embed internally, and then we build the team, to eventually grow externally. And knowing that takes time and a lot of patience, knowing that we might not make a return for a very long time, but to really just be focused on how do we solve, the challenges of our markets and the SDGs.
I'm going to come back to you actually on some of those the learning lessons on that. But just what does BII expect to get out of this?
Well, enhanced development impact is the first thing, right? I mean, we've set some pretty good criteria around what we would expect to do, which is that. So I think it's trying to address the needs of our markets. We have a higher threshold of development impact, and Laurie's absolutely right. I mean, we today have what I think is the best-in-class impact framework across our entire portfolio. But that is only because the Catalyst portfolio has allowed us to understand how to build that sophisticated framework. And so, I mean, that is ultimately what we're trying to do is to be able to have enhanced impact.
Great, thanks. I think you alluded to all of this expansion of these different tools that's been made possible through Catalyst and how that's spread throughout BII. And I think actually Raghu from LoadShare is going to tell a great story about what actually some of those tools look like in action and what the impact of those are. Just for those who are unfamiliar, Raghu, I'd just like to ask you to start by sharing with everybody what LoadShare is, what you do, how you started the organization as an entrepreneur. Just give us, a couple of minutes of the backstory.
Hey everybody, my name is Raghu Taluri and I run LoadShare. LoadShare is a last mile logistics platform based in India. And our idea is to have bike riders do all kinds of deliveries at the last mile to customers. And that includes everything from food delivery to e-commerce shipment delivery to pharmacy delivery. Quick commerce, is like a big thing in India now, where customers get their groceries and other things in 10 minutes, to even using the rider to perform like a bike taxi service for clients like Uber. So we perform pretty much everything in the last mile. And the backstory on this is we started in 2017. And this was a time when e-commerce in India was kind of making its way into the tier 2, tier 3 towns. And I was at that time working with Myntra, part of the Flipkart group. And I could see from my role there that, look, really customers are ready, but the service of logistics is actually quite kind of not in place, right? And that's why I feel it's a compelling, thing for me to kind of try and build this out. And it also goes back to my personal story, personal roots of actually growing up in some of these tier 3 locations where I just felt like customers with e-commerce could get access. Customers really want these kind of products that are not available locally. And the real missing link is actually a good quality service of delivery, right? So that's where the dots connected for me from multiple angles. And I felt it's a compelling, story, compelling proposition for me to kind of dive into this and try and build out a last mile logistics service in underserved markets. So that's where we started. And we started pretty much from the most underserved part of India, which is the northeastern part. And there we kind of started providing to the leading platforms like Flipkart, Amazon, and we just found such a strong pull from them and such a strong pull from customers that we felt like, we hit product market fit in many ways right from the word go. And subsequently, we have now expanded into different parts of India. Now the, action for us is not just in the tier 2, tier 3 towns, but also in tier 1 towns and metros where there's a massive demand for delivery services. And really our objective function is now shifted to how can we become like a platform of choice for the rider at the last mile so that he comes to us and we give him the best earnings opportunity, him or her, the best earnings opportunity at the flexibility of working that he wants, right? So now we are kind of looking at working not just in the underserved regions, but also cities themselves are becoming underserved with the amount of demand that is there, and riders kind of having need for tools to help them navigate through multiple options so that they can optimize their lives. So this is a quick background about LoadShare. I hope it gives you some background, like something to understand better among us, and we can talk more about Catalyst program, etc. But yeah, over to you.
One of my my favorite part actually about my job of being an impact investing journalist is that I get to write and talk to entrepreneurs like Raghu all the time, it seems so obvious when you've been doing this for a while that people who are going into markets that are underserved with basic products and services, there's clearly an opportunity there, and there's always going to be demand for those types of services. And yet, a lot of the investment world, I think, doesn't really understand or know how to underwrite those types of deals and opportunities because the markets are just so unfamiliar to them. Raghu, when did you all start talking to BII about a partnership? And maybe you can share a little bit about what some of the early investments and capital support you got from BII looked like and what that enabled you to do as an organization.
So we had gotten off the ground and we were looking for the next round of funding for us to help strengthen our story, which was more about kind of how do we go deeper into these tier 2, tier 3 markets? How do we strengthen the proposition to our customers and to end customers, right? And that was time, and we closed our Series B where BII came in through the Catalyst program, and I remember very vividly because we kind of closed the deal just a few days into when lockdown was announced in India during COVID. And I just was so grateful that we got an additional quantum of capital for us to be able to survive that period, make sure that all the riders and employees that we had with us and all the kind of the whole ecosystem that we were carrying in our own way in those markets that we're already in, they could be secure and we could last through some of the tough times at that point, right? So not just the quantum of capital, but the timing of the capital that it came through and the conviction with which it came through, I think it was very, very refreshing and very kind of gave a lot of kind of relief to us, and it helped us kind of go and do things that we otherwise would have paused. For example, this allowed us to kind of invest in things that would have been not really kind of priority at that point. We would have done only the here and now things just to kind of get through. But we use this additional quantum that came in through BII to actually do things that were important for the longer term and important investments that we could make in terms of tools for the delivery boys. For example, like we built very strong grievance mechanisms. We built ways in which the payouts could be automated. We built ways in which we could allocate them better orders, right? So these are all investments that would have been at that time, situationally, we would not have kind of prioritized them because of paucity of capital. But we could do that because we had additional capital that came in through Catalyst. And also, equally importantly, I think the mindset and the support that we got saying, look, these are initiatives that are important for the longer term. They've got second order effects that one should be conscious of as a being a longer term company. So I think that was a very, very important intervention that came up in the early days. This is circa 2020. We also, at that time, we also got access to BII plus the TA program, where we did a bunch of things we otherwise would not have done. And they actually in the longer term proved to be very, very powerful. For example, one of the two things that we had as a part of BII plus one was medicine delivery. This was very relevant at that time. And I think we did fairly impactful work using this pool of additional support that we would have otherwise not done because it was an investment, right? It needed some amount of initial investment for it to be taken off the ground, to take off the ground. And the second thing is it actually helped us kind of build the hyperlocal delivery service, which is now perhaps the mainstay of the business. Now we do a lot of business which is working with pharma companies, quick commerce companies, is a point-to-point delivery, right? Very, very time definite within a few hours. Is what we kind of started piloting with the BII support on the medicine delivery side. The second thing which we did not take forward but was also very relevant and very important at that time was cold chain. We explored cold chain, which we otherwise would not have. And it is a matter of prioritization that we take that one forward. But the medicine delivery was kind of very important in terms of putting a foundational block in place for us as a capability.
I mean, I think probably many would argue that you were so lucky to go into the pandemic as a company that was delivering essential goods and services, right? Because we know what our own lives were like and how much we depended on that at the time. And yet, you spoke about just all of these different, one, just how the capital allowed you to be a long-term thinker in a situation where people were having to react minute by minute, day by day to the situation on hand, and things were changing very quickly. And also, that you had different types of capital that allowed you to experiment and plan and shift your business in different ways. And I understand, I think, Load Share, you have now a loan from the kinetic facility that we were talking about, the more even more risk-taking facility, and this is just tell us what that loan is designed to help you do now, and how lending capital other than equity and technical assistance, factors into your market building journey.
So LoadShare is a last mile focused logistics company, and I think globally and definitely in India, we find a last mile. If you have to play in the last mile, your strategy has to be synonymous with the electric vehicle strategy, given multiple benefits that it gets along, right? Number one, we have clients who have a near infinite demand for electrifying their last miles because of multiple, it could be SDG oriented, it could be also from a cost saving point of view. So we find that there is an infinite demand for electric vehicles or electric fleet. So that's one of the big, things contextually of where we are right now. Second thing is, we also, through initial experiments, we found out that actually by electrifying our fleet, we are actually getting closer to our profitability objective. So as a company, we feel it's not one of those things that is orthogonal to your profitability. It's not something that you do for showing and getting some, some brownie points on getting some, green credits, right? It is actually helping the business get profitable. So that's the second big kind of a thing that aligns towards more and more electrification. The third one, equally important, is we find that this allows us to tap into a pool of riders who don't have electric bikes or don't have bikes even. And when we are arranging EV bikes for them, we are tapping into a strata of the society who's actually worse off than the delivery boys who already have, or delivery executives who already have bikes, right? So it opens up a newer pool of labor, and we feel it's very gratifying because you're able to bring them into the labor pool with very decent earnings, right? That this job can provide. So along all dimensions, both from a client demand perspective, from a rider supply side perspective, and from the company's profitability objective, electrification kind of is very, very kind of critical, and it's actually the one of the biggest things. Now we have 20,000 riders who work with us on a weekly active basis. Thanks to the kinetic program, we've been able to get a solid EV play going, and right now as we speak, we have 2,000 bikes that we've been able to deploy on a daily basis. And we have capital that is lined up for us to be able to take it to at least 18,000 bikes in the next few months. And that's a sizable fleet that we built. So the fact that not just the fact that we are getting low cost capital, it's almost like saying we are getting capital that is designed for doing things which regular equity would not have allowed us to do, is I think a massive kind of it's perhaps we would not have gone down this path at all, and we would have kind of kept pottering with some kind of EV plays, but really not with the big programmatic focus that we have now. So now the focus is for us over the next year, 2 years, how can we transition to becoming an EV first company? And like we said, it aligns on all angles. And the missing part on that was friendly capital that comes with the right terms, with the right checks and balances, of course, but also is not prohibitive for us to think about ever availing, right? So I think, very grateful to the Kinetic program. It kind of helps us build a very, very new muscle a muscle that we would have otherwise not built.
And I think oftentimes electric vehicles are framed around what the climate impacts of that are, but I think as you've outlined very clearly, there are enormous social impacts in many cases that are really not obvious to people unless there are these programs and initiatives and investment that help tease that out. The government of India, of course, has pretty strong incentive programs for EV adoption, especially on smaller format, two-wheel and three-wheel vehicles. But what I consistently hear, is that one of the obstacles for driving EV adoption is just that people need financing to acquire those vehicles, and that a lot of lenders don't understand how to underwrite this market yet. And so I think what I understand actually is from the Kinetic loan, you're also doing this data sharing partnership, if I'm not mistaken, right, to help other financial institutions understand how to underwrite EV financing and ultimately open up the EV finance market in India to accelerate not just environmental impacts, but also social. And that speaks to me, I guess, as a real example of what market building looks like in this case. And so on that point, I'm actually going to turn over to Michael from MedAccess, because your story is all about market building, right? Michael, maybe just for those who aren't necessarily familiar with MedAccess, you can just provide us a little bit of the background about what it is, and maybe even just your personal experience in getting involved in this program.
Thanks very much, Jessica. I'm so impressed and inspired by Raghu's story. I'm trying to shift my brain into, and I was wondering if I could come work for you possibly, because I think it sounds like it's just a terrific innovation. It's really good.
Yeah, it's exactly the kind of story that we journalists love to tell too. So, yeah.
So let me pull my head back. So my own experiences, I a variety of things in my life previously, including I was previously Director General at DFID, which was the parent company for CDC as it was then. And one day I had a phone call from Diana Noble, the CEO, saying, look, we have this idea for a new platform, and would you like to help be involved in it? So that's how I got involved, but it was very much, the idea was not conceived initially by me, it was conceived of by BII and Diana and some people in DFID, Gates Foundation, this amazing gentleman named Ira Magaziner who kind of helped invent market shaping for medical products. So MedAccess was set up as a platform to address a fundamental problem we have in the world, which is about access to medicines. And when I say medicines, I mean diagnostics, vaccines, treatments, devices, a whole range of things that people need to remain healthy. And we're in this very weird position in human history at the moment. We're in a golden age of medical innovation. Never before in human history have we innovated so many new products so quickly at such higher effectiveness. At the same time, we have populations around the world that are getting older. They're having more and more non-communicable disease problems, diabetes and obesity and challenges. So the overall burden of need for medicine is growing just at the time that we're inventing lots of new things. And yet, according to the WHO, there are more than 2 billion people who cannot get access to the most basic medicines they need to remain healthy. And so a large part of that is about market failure. There are lots of companies who have the best of science. They have amazing devotion to producing terrific products and great manufacturing skills. And they'd love to get those products out into the hands of people who can use them. And you've got lots of people who are making out-of-pocket payments for products and governments who can't afford products. And the supply and the demand are not working well often. And so the market is often not doing what we told markets are supposed to do, which is clear. And there are reasons for that. The market fails. And what MedAccess does, in essence, Jessica, is we broker and finance agreements that make it possible for manufacturers to reduce the price of their products and to sell them in much larger volumes and to bring them into new jurisdictions that otherwise would not be covered. And I can talk about some of the examples, but that's our core business. Mm-hmm. And over this, the 6 and some years we've existed, we've helped bring medical products to 539 million people around the world in 110 countries. In that process, we've saved governments, in terms of their purchasing, we've saved them much more than $110 million. And we've helped shape markets. So we shape markets for particular products, and I can say more about that. But that's roughly what we do. We're an organization of 30 people, a specialist organization set up by BII, incubated in BII, conceived of within BII, and supported with patient capital. If we didn't have the patient capital from Catalyst, we would not exist. We absolutely would not. And one of the reasons why we are the only company in the world that does this kind of thing is because BII is willing to provide that patient capital.
I mean, and noteworthy, you're the biggest investment from Catalyst, I believe, right, as well? I think we can all remember, just as an example of, the inequitable access to medicine and life-saving drugs and medical services that you mentioned. We all remember, waiting for the COVID vaccines to roll out, right? And those were being developed in Europe and in the US, and those were the first places that got them. And still, even years later, it was challenging in Africa and other markets for people to get the vaccines that they needed, right? And so this is the type of work that you're talking about, right? Is ensuring that there is this more equitable distribution of these services, and that medical providers are incentivized to go into these markets. Can you just explain actually how these guarantees work?
So let me just take an example. There's many people in the world have latent tuberculosis, and many of us don't know that, but about 25% of the human population has latent TB.
Didn't know that.
Most of us, it doesn't become active before we die. But if you're immunocompromised in any way, then latent TB becomes active. And I saw this in my own father. Towards the end of his life, he became immunocompromised, and he developed tuberculosis at the end of his life, and that's not unusual. But people who are facing immune challenges, they need to treat the TB when it's in the latent phase before it becomes active. So there's a standard course of treatment, which was typically 6 months, sometimes 9 months, pretty cheap, pretty horrible. The side effects of tuberculosis treatments are just awful. And so a new treatment had been developed by the French company Sanofi, which is only 3 months, and it's much more effective, much better tolerated by patients, but it was expensive. So, $45 a course, and that was not going to work for most of the lower and middle income countries. So we partnered with a manufacturer in Mumbai called McLeod's, and we worked out with them that if we gave them a volume guarantee, if we guaranteed a certain level of sales over a period of years, they could increase the volumes of their production. And that could bring, because of economies of scale, they could drive down their costs. And that allowed them to bring the product to market at $15 per course. So at $15 per course, it becomes really affordable around the world. And that has had a really significant impact in terms of this treatment being available to many more users around the world. So what we do is we provide a financial guarantee. We do really careful assessments of what do we think the demand is going to be in the market, and what are the careful risk assessments of what would drive demand up or down, and we negotiate with the company, what would you need to produce in order to bring your costs down? How much would you have to produce? So we work on one hand with the manufacturing economics, the other side with supply and demand in the market, and we reach a place where we say to them, okay, we're going to make what is essentially sales insurance. We're going to guarantee that over a period of years you're going to sell a certain amount, and if you don't, we'll make payments to you. And that allows the company to take on the business risk. And often it's about bringing these products into markets that are perceived to be risky, especially innovative new products. And companies don't want to go into risky markets where demand is uncertain. And we take away that business risk so that it makes it possible for companies to do remarkable things with their products.
I think perceived to be risky is probably a common phrase that I use in almost every story that I report. In the conversation you and I had about this before, you explained to me that effectively what you're doing is, in a lot of cases, asking manufacturers to go from these low volume, high margin models to a high volume, low margin model, right? Which is a big ask, I think, for a company to do that. Maybe that's cushioned by the fact that they have these volume guarantees, like you mentioned. But what happens, once these guarantees sunset in the markets that you've been working in?
It's a terrific question. I mean, we help the companies get there, but what we want in the end is the net present value of their total sales should go up, not down, right? I mean, this should be commercially something that's attractive to them. Without that, they're not going to stay in the market. But what we aim to do is we aim to drop the equilibrium price in the market. And we do that by encouraging, making sure there are multiple suppliers in the market, not just one, we can. And what we typically like to do is back one manufacturer who can help bring down the price, and that causes others in the market to match that. And what we've seen in the volume guarantees we've had so far, they're typically anywhere from 2 to 6 years, but they're typically 4 years long. When we leave the market, it's the power of competition that keeps the price down. And that has so far been successful. And therefore, you have a permanent move from this high margin product to a lower margin product. And it still works for the companies. And once you demonstrate that there's demand, then other companies come in because it's clearly demonstrated demand that is enduring. And that's part of the magic of making this work.
How much of this is sort of replicable versus how much depends on the type of medical intervention, who your partners are, and their willingness to take on this, or at least to be open to what they perceive to be risk in entering these new markets, and the market dynamics themselves. Policy, is going to be different everywhere. Governments are going to be, officials are going to be different everywhere. So, what is the sort of, you spoke about, a general success rate, but like on an individual deal by deal basis, what does that look like?
Well, so one thing I would say is that there's a series of complex multi-stakeholder partnerships. So when we contract with a manufacturer, but before we do that, we have to make sure that a bunch of governments are interested in the product. We have to make sure WHO thinks it's a good product. We have to check out the quality of the medical evidence that this is going to make sense, it's going to produce better outcomes, make sure that the big purchasers are on board. So we have to check out with a range of stakeholders that they're on board with this. Because of that, these are quite costly deals to put together.
Yeah.
It's not just sitting and negotiating with the manufacturer. There's a whole ecosystem. And because what we're trying to do is change the market for that product, not just support a single company to be successful, you've got to think a lot about what's the regulatory environment and what's the availability of the product. So, to your question of specific products, they vary enormously from product to product. They're really bespoke. I'll give you an example of one we haven't yet cracked, but I would love to, which is the availability of antifungal treatment. There are lots of funguses in the world which are deadly. There are many, many countries in the world where the most important antifungal treatments are not even registered for use in the country, much less available. And they're really expensive. And that's the kind of place where the market has failed. Humanity's invented this amazing product. It's actually not that expensive to manufacture, but we haven't yet got to the place where we get all of the pieces together. So in answer to your question, it varies enormously from piece to piece. And we've supported the world's first malaria vaccine rolling out. We supported new generation mosquito bed nets that are 44% more effective at preventing malaria. So in that kind of case, we look at the malaria one. We've saved $24 million for governments who are buying these nets because we brought the price down. We've averted our guarantee alone. When we do this really rigorous assessment of what's the counterfactual, what would sell without our guarantee, and then with the guarantee, what's the increase? And this rigor was pioneered by Diana Noble, who was kind of chair of our investment committee for some time. That counterfactual analysis shows us that for these bed nets, we averted about 16 million cases of malaria just during the duration. So we always look at the impact for each individual deal, and we look at how's the market being shaped, how much money are we saving, how much impact are we having with healthcare. But to your question, each one depends on a whole specific set of partnerships. In terms of their success, we haven't had any calls yet on any of the guarantees.
Okay.
So that's, knock on wood, that's beginner's luck so far. We're going to stick with that. We have discovered over time that there is a growing pipeline. These tools are very specific. They can only be used in some circumstances, not in every. They're not a panacea. But we've discovered, we have now in our pipeline, we're looking at launching the very first deal on treatment radiotherapy for breast cancer, cervical cancer. We're hoping to be able to announce that really soon. We've got new treatments new tests for sickle cell disease, really innovative product. So we've expanded beyond range of products we started with. And what we're seeing as we've kind of grown the organization is the pipeline is growing really rapidly. One other thing I'll say, Jessica, it really depends on having specialist skills. You know, Laurie talked earlier about having a center of excellence.
Yeah.
The only thing that makes this work is we have a specialist team, people who understand, you know, how do you do structured finance, how do you think about debt, people who really understand the epidemiology and the clinical impact, and then we've got a bunch of people who do the market analytics. What's the supply and demand dynamics? What's the procurement and regulatory environment? And we need all of those people together in a concentrated environment where they're collaborating with each other to think about how to come up with these proposals. So there's a lot of intellectual labor that goes into one of these.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's sort of hard to convey in a short conversation like this, just how much effort and probably friction you've experienced in some of this work. And I think it really does show, you know, with a $200 million investment, just how important patient capital is for these sort of market building exercises, and you know, and partners who are willing to give you the time and the space to experiment. Maria, I'm going to come back to you because I said I was going to come back on that learning culture question. I mean, there have clearly been a lot of learnings with MedAccess, also with you know some of the entrepreneurial partners and other parts of the portfolio. Describe what BII's attitude is around this sort of willingness to learn.
Yeah, well, we need a big appetite for it, don't we? I mean, as
Right.
DFI, we're taking risks, we're pushing the envelope, and we have to be learning from our successes, but also our, you know, our failures. And so, yeah, we're always striving to be a learning organization, and you know, we do that formally. We've got evaluations programs. Kate Griffiths in the audience who leads our evaluations program, where you know we're trying to take the learnings from at a portfolio level and having that feed into strategic decisions. So, you know, our current strategy, which is running from 22 to 26, was very much fed from the evaluations that came out of the last. But then we also, I mean, specific to Catalyst, we have a Catalyst Forum. Is that what it's called? Yeah, that looks at all of the Catalyst investments across the portfolio and shares lessons learned. I mean, a lot of which is in the report in terms of what we've learned over the years.
What I guess the other question I was going to get to is in terms of learning around risk specifically, right? And where more risk taking should be done. I mean, not everything, right, has worked in this work, has it, right?
No. I mean, I think one of the things we've learned is not to layer risks, right? So I think one of our big lessons is risk upon risk upon risk is not usually, you know, hold up in the long term. So
can you give an example?
I can. So if you think about what we've tried to do in some of our ag funds in Africa, for example. So, you know, we know that private equity, closed-end private equity funds in Africa can be challenging if they have too short of a fund life because exits are challenging in Africa. We know that agriculture on the continent is also challenging. Their seasonality, they're more prone to climate shocks. And so when you start, you know, layering on risk upon risk, you know, we've experimented a lot in this sector and we will continue to do so because there is a huge development need, but we need to be a bit more targeted on how we look at it. So that's one example, is we try to compartmentalize the risk, and so we have this framework that looks at, you know, company risk, market risk, country risk, et cetera, and we try to make sure that we're not adding them up too much.
Do you have any examples you can cite, actually, of some of the harder lessons that Catalyst has gotten out of it?
I'm not short of challenges. I mean, the first one that comes to mind for a lot of us is the work that we did in Myanmar. So, you know, we invested quite a bit in market building exercises in Myanmar. And, you know, I do want to mention TA because this is another thing that kind of came out of Catalyst, just like our impact framework, in that we first used technical assistance only with our Catalyst portfolio. And that was so successful in terms of our value add that we now do this across our portfolio. And we have thematic programs across different sectors and across different countries, which has been hugely beneficial. But in Myanmar, we did this market building program, and we invested in a fund there and a couple other investments, and then there was a coup. And I mean, this is a shock that no one can anticipate, but it's the reality of our markets is these shocks happen, and they happen often. And so, you know, over time, this was quite disappointing in that, you know, we haven't had success. So that's one example.
What happens to that portfolio there? Is it just understood that that's going to be effectively a loss, and that, you know, the rest of the portfolio will sort of hopefully cushion that loss, that the work can continue in other places?
Well, that's exactly right. So that's why we've built a diversified portfolio in Catalyst, is that we can tolerate losses. You know, some entire losses, some, you know, 50% losses. But because we have some that have done incredibly well and are succeeding commercially, that offsets it, which over time has allowed us to preserve capital. So I think you have to take a diversified approach.
Laurie mentioned an example of an ag tech fund in India, Omnivore, which I know BII has invested in multiple rounds, right? And so there's some of that early investment, which was deemed to be, you know, that's pretty. Omnivore was one of the first, I think, to do ag tech investing in like a specific ag tech fund in India. Now I think they're on fund 3 or 4, fund 3. And so that was a Catalyst investment initially, and now I think it's gone into the growth portfolio, right?
Yep.
So I mean, I think that there are also these cases of something that seemed really scary, potentially, and very high risk in the beginning, you know, becoming familiar, right? And it's and so what then, you know, as you learn and as some of these investments, I don't know if graduate's the right word, but transition into the bigger growth fund, how do you keep pushing the bounds on what risk looks like as you're getting more familiar with, you know, with what previously seemed very risky?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, I do use the term graduation, and I love this story. Okay. And now not only is it catalyst to growth, but it's kinetic to catalyst to growth. And you know, I love this idea of graduation. I mean, that's success, right? As that you move from up the spectrum of these different risk pools of capital. How we assess risk across the portfolio. I mean, I see Yasmin in the room, and she's done an excellent job of creating a sort of a framework for us to look at, you know, risk across our portfolio, which was not an easy exercise, because you can imagine all the different types of risks that we monitor and manage, but it does let us take, again, a whole portfolio view of the risks that we're taking, and then we can make decisions on where we allocate different pools of capital.
That's great. I know you all have been listening to me for the last 40 minutes, pepper people with questions up here, and I think we might also have some audience questions. Oh, okay. Great.
If you would try to have anybody with a question.
I mean, I can ask questions for days, so everybody, there we go. Okay.
Thank you very much. My name is Amy. A brilliant presentation. I want to ask if you could elaborate more on that risk approach, risk grading, especially given the project can be very like diverse, and how do you make it more comparable, like at the board level, and what sort of approach do you do, seems like it's like a quite iterative approach do you take when you are doing such risk assessment and grading in order to bring it to next stage? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll answer high level, and then we can talk bilaterally, because it's actually quite a complex. But you know, as you can imagine, we're operating in 64 countries. We're investing in all sorts of different products, from equity to debt, and you know, higher risk pools of capital, different sectors. So we have a risk rating for our investments that takes into all of these different you know, extras. We have a team that helps us through that. So that allows us to compare at a portfolio level. It's taken a long time to build it. Yeah, but I'm quite happy to spend more time in detail on that. For Catalyst specifically, we have sort of four categories of risk that we look at every investment through, that are specific to the catalytic risk we're taking.
Okay, great.
Hi, Hannah Wengier Ryder. I run a firm called Development Reimagined. I wanted to thank you for asking the question about losses, because I was going to ask that, because I think it's really important to be able to talk about losses in this space, and I think a lot of DFIs don't really do that. I also wondered whether you could talk a little bit about localization, because, again, a lot of DFIs have a mandate specifically to be going out and supporting their own firms to go out into markets. And I wondered to what degree you have, this fund has been able to deal with that, whether that is a constraint or not for you, and to what degree you are able to do more localization, local manufacturing, etc. Michael knows that that's one of my things. But how are you able to deal with that?
Yes, I mean, increasingly we've been trying to, work with local partners, and I mean we've built out a regional team since I've been here, from I think one person in India to where are we now? And people, over 60 people. Thank you. I think 15 offices if you count the single person offices across our markets. And the reasoning for that is we're trying to make sure that we are, first of all, really understanding the market needs and making sure we're addressing those. We're evaluating the local development plans. We're trying to meet local teams. We're trying increasingly to invest in indigenous management teams. And you can only really do that if you've got, people on the ground. Obviously, we can work very closely with our shareholder, who's got offices in markets all over our markets as well, which is what we do. So, this is something we also monitor internally. Is how many local businesses are we supporting? So it's important to us.
Hi, Howard here. Thanks for the presentations. I just wanted to see, you've got quite a few different kind of portfolios now, and I wanted to kind of ask how Catalyst compares from an impact point of view, how much impact has been achieved throughout the different portfolios, and actually if your ambition for more impact has actually been achieved.
Yeah. Good question, and the answer is I can say yes, which is good. We are seeing higher impact. So we've got an impact framework that allows us to compare across the different portfolios, it's a score essentially. And what we've seen over time is that the impact that we're seeing from the Catalyst portfolio is higher than the rest of the portfolio, which you would expect. I think one of the questions we're constantly asking us is also like looking at the other measures. So, around risk, right? So are we taking enough risk to maximize that impact? And I think the answer is no. We're asking ourselves this question, which is, can we be taking more risk in Catalyst in order to get that number, and that impact even higher? And so that's, I think, our challenge of the hour.
I've got a question. So catalyzing markets requires patience and partnership. How difficult has it been to continue building and maintaining these partnerships? And specifically, I think they want to draw on both Michael and Raghu's experience of partnership working with BII.
I can make maybe an intro comment, and then it'd be great to hear from you guys directly. To me, the story of what we were able to do in COVID for companies like Locha, but others, is exactly what we need to be doing as a DFI. So if we're picking the right partners, which we should be, then sticking with them through challenging times is exactly what we're meant to do, right? This saying that a banker will give you an umbrella when it's sunny and then take it away when it rains. We're supposed to be exactly the opposite, right? Which is we double down on our partners that we believe in during really challenging times. And I love what we were able to do in COVID in that way, is we said, look, if we've got the right partners, let's lean in, right? Everybody else is like shutting the tap down. Let's lean in and make sure we're supporting them so that Raghu and others could do exactly what they can do. But I'll pass it to you guys.
Raghu, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add to it. I think I mentioned how timely it was, but also I think as we look at the DNA of the company and where we want to be and what kind of work we want to do and the impact more broadly beyond commercial that we want to do, I have just like a rule of thumb. I think 70% should be, and it aligns to personal philosophy of founders at LoadShare as well. 70% should be commercial impact and 30% should be something that is coming from a impact beyond just the first order numbers that you look at, right? Impacted the ecosystem that you're working in, impacted all the people that you're kind of engaging with you, either directly as employees or beyond. I think on that, the alignment that we've seen through discussions, through and actually being borne out in action is actually the highest among, I can safely say this, among all our investors. The alignment that we have with the way, BII has been supporting us and has been kind of helping us think through this further has been the highest, right? So COVID is one example, but even subsequently, when we were running our Series C, we always knew that BII would kind of support us with critical capital for us to keep pushing the agenda and beyond whatever is like invested capital that is coming from other investors, additional quantum that comes is which allows us to do things that are kind of beyond just pure commercial considerations. But also, interestingly, we find that what we think is beyond commercial considerations comes back and makes the company much more healthier and much more relevant to the ecosystem they're working in. The impact that we have on riders kind of helps and strengthens the platform commercially, right? So some of these things are truly kind of, and the kinetic program is another one, right? Where we just find that we didn't have to do a lot of convincing. I think the interest and the nudge came from BII, and we kind of had to say, okay, yes, we think we can actually do like take this capital and really put it to good use. And it was very kind of smooth, constructive, and really kind of upping the ambition of what we initially had thought of doing on the electric side.
Maybe I'll just chip in quickly with, I have another COVID-related story, which is during COVID, there was a huge need for PPE and diagnostics and vaccines, enormous demand. One of the main procurers of these products, especially for the smallest low-income countries, one of the most important procurers is UNICEF. So if you're Guinea-Bissau, you don't have a way to buy the stuff because you have no negotiating strength in the market. So you tend to rely on entities like UNICEF. UNICEF had this anticipation. There was lots and lots of orders had to be placed. And they needed to place orders in advance so they could get lower prices, but they didn't have enough money to do it. So along with the Gates Foundation, MedAccess supplied a guarantee to UNICEF. We guaranteed them $50 million. They've got and buy this stuff. We expect you're going to be able to sell it somewhere, and if you don't, we'll make you whole. That required BII to be totally ready to flex and say, oh yeah, okay, well, in addition to the kind of guarantees you're doing previously, you can do these too, and we'll take all the risk of this 50 million. And that took a lot of courage and a lot of alignment. And I think, if it hadn't been for BII's absolute support and flexibility and willingness to do something totally new, we wouldn't have been in that place. And that makes a big, big difference. I would say one thing that's really important for MedAccess is we're in a weird third place between not a for-profit company, not a charity. We're in kind of some weird Bermuda Triangle in the middle where we're trying to have lots and lots of impact. And that means people have to park their existing software at the door and be prepared to run different software about how do we think about this platform. And BII has been really good about doing that and challenging us and help us think about how to describe what it is we're doing and how to make it different. And I do think it's, one of the things on the local manufacturing question, there are lots of people ready to put in CapEx and help invest in the lowest part of the J-curves. There's nobody at the moment helping companies think about de-risking their offtake and their sales. And I think it's one of the growth areas for MedAccess, where I think the finance industry as a whole just hasn't thought enough about how do we help on the demand side as well as helping to beef up supply. And BII has been really, really supportive of us as MedAccess getting into that place so we can help accelerate local manufacturing that wouldn't happen otherwise. And again, intellectual flexibility has been a huge part of that.
Thanks, Chris Isaac, AgDevCo. We're a big fan of Catalyst, and only partly.
Of course, our new ag.
My question is about looking into the future, and in particular for you, Michael. There's increasing talk that we're in a post-aid world, that traditional aid is in crisis, perhaps losing its sense of purpose, perhaps losing political support. I just wonder whether you think that Catalyst is perhaps showing what a future of aid might look like.
Shall I?
No, go ahead.
I think you're completely right, Chris. It is clearly the case that the political support for aid in its old traditional sense is decaying both in the global north and the global south. I mean, nobody wants what that was before. There's still lots of need for grant funding, I have to say. And let's not abandon it too quickly because, boy, there's a lot of stuff that can only be done with grants. But I do think that part of the reasons that I was interested in Diana's proposition, would you be interested in helping to create this MedAccess thing, is I do think it's helping to pave a way to a place where patient capital, plus the kinds of entrepreneurial skill that Raghu brings, can forge solutions that are new and fresh and sustainable. So it feels like it's the growth area. It is the future. I have to say, I think AgDevCo's done a great job of paving the way on that too.
Absolutely.
Ashish Kumar here. When talking about catalytic capital, there's a suite of new types of innovative finance products coming out, like some of them you may have deployed already, like redeemable equity or impact index loan, to more capital market oriented products like GSS bonds and stuff. So I'd be curious, as you expand and evolve the program, how are you thinking about those suite of new instruments which are more suited for certain type of facilities or borrowers? Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, the industry is evolving quickly. We are trying to keep up, I would say. But we've, impact-linked incentives, for example. We will probably be launching a lessons learned report because we realize we have about 25 or more businesses that we've supported across our portfolio that have some sort of impact-linked incentives. I mean, some of that is, rebates on loans. Some of it has been carry linked to impact. We've done some, obviously, where we invest in platforms will link management KPIs. And so, just to pick up on that example, we've done quite a bit, and we're trying to do more. We're also increasing our exposure in different blended finance instruments, thinking about first loss, trying to work with partners that have been doing this longer and maybe have access to larger institutional pools of capital that we can mobilize if we're investing in these different types of instruments. So yes, we are innovating and evolving with the industry.
I want to thank Raghu for. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Hi, my name is Jennifer. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for the last thing you said about not being sure where you are, because I sat and I was thinking, is this for profit or is this for what? Having to do the number of impact that you do. You said something at the time you mentioned TB in investment that you did, and you said the competition prices would bring, so the force would bring the price down. So my question is, how do you enforce standard? And for you as an organization, it's sustainable development, same thing as sustainable impact for you. Because at the time you get out of that contract, how do you ensure that what you have done stays on forever? So that's my question.
That's a great question, and it does keep me awake at 3 o'clock in the morning sometimes. I mean, the truth is we rely on our analysis of where we think the market will go if we can bring the price equilibrium down. So far, we've been really lucky, but there is no guarantee. I mean, after the volume guarantee is over, there's no way we can force the company to keep their price down. What we rely upon is having helped to support the creation of a market that is sustainable, where we're demonstrating there's more demand, and we typically see demand go up after you've demonstrated that, hey, this product's available and it can be reasonably, affordable. Then more and more buyers come in, and then more sellers come in. That's what's worked so far. But boy, next time we talk, I may tell you that it was a disaster, and we've actually found that it didn't work.
Well, I don't necessarily want to close on the word disaster. I think it's a good lesson actually for you brought us full circle around what the actual impact that we're looking at here is and what's on the line. I want to thank Maria, Michael, and Raghu for joining online. I'm going to hand it over to Sarah Marchand. She's going to talk a bit more about the report. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to read it yet, I think there's copies circulating around.
There are some copies.
And also online for those of you joining online. So, thank you.
I have some good news for people in the room. It looks very dark outside, and it is very dark, but this clock is in fact wrong. It is only 6 p.m, and there still is time to have a drink afterwards. I'm Sarah Marchand. I'm the Director of Capital Solutions at BII. It's normally very hard to describe what that means, but today we've talked a lot about capital pools and our toolkit and why BII is all about flexibility and solutions to meet the needs of our clients and our entrepreneurs in our market. So it feels very relevant today. I'm going to say a few more thank yous to build on the ones we heard earlier, and then just a few things about kind of what's next for Catalyst. So thank you very much to all of the people who you've heard from today, to Jessica for coming over and facilitating a fantastic conversation, to all of our panelists, especially Raghu, who is in India, so it's extremely late where he is. So particularly big thank you for staying up and speaking to us and telling us your story. Thank you to Maria, thank you to Laurie for all the great comments, and thank you to Michael as well. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for everyone online. I think there are lots more people who've been listening to us. If I can, thank you to all the investment professionals who've done the deals that we've been talking about today. We know that the Catalyst deals, and we do mention in this report, they are harder, they take longer, they take real tenacity to bring those to life. So, you know, on behalf of everyone, thank you to them. And of course, thank you to all of the companies and funds and the entrepreneurs who are actually at the coalface and, you know, running these businesses, allocating our capital, and, you know, without whom all this impact wouldn't be happening. So need to recognise that. We've talked a lot. We've had a very rich conversation, I think. I mean, a few key takeaways for me. I mean, I think we've seen here, we've talked a lot about the portfolio level, right? But we've heard actually from the largest investment that we've made in the Catalyst portfolio, that 200 million equity check to set up a brand new platform that Michael's been talking about in terms of MedAccess, but also our first equity check to Raghu and to LoadShare was $2 million. So like a huge breadth in terms of what this portfolio has been able to do in terms of ticket size. We've talked about different types of instruments and products we've used. We've also talked about like some successes, some of the companies and funds we've backed that have become growth, that have kind of graduated, if you like, to our main book, have proved out those models that we didn't know whether they would work, the markets would work, the business models would work. They've proved those out. We've also talked a little bit about some of the things that haven't worked so well that we've learned from and where we still need to experiment more. And of course, commercial success or the success of an investment for us and whether or not we make money isn't always totally correlated with the impact. We do have instances where we may not make money, but we're quite happy with what we've done because actually the company or the fund that we've backed has had impact, and that's continuing regardless of whether or not we've made money. So I think it's important to say that as well. But the reality is actually this is a very young portfolio. So it's been 10 years, but it's built it's accelerated in its growth, if you like, in the last few years, and you can see that in the report in terms of the chart about the deployment. So I think it's safe to say that there are still many, many more learnings to come. And in particular, one of the things that we're going to be talking about more next year will be some of the learnings at the market level. We've heard a bit about what MedAccess has been able to do at a market level in terms of catalyzing markets, but we're taking a deeper look at where we've been able to catalyze markets and what market level effects we've had with Catalyst and what we can learn about that. I think we can have more intentionality there. I think there's more to do. So we look forward to sharing more on that. We hope to see lots more deals transition into the growth portfolio, and we hope to do more with Kinetic as well. We've talked quite a lot about Kinetic today. You've heard a bit from Raghu about what the Climate Innovation Facility can do. There was a recent announcement about another new Kinetic facility, which is more focused on the simultaneous mobilization, the mobilization facility. There's more to come on that, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but keep your eyes out for more on that. We'll continue to grow Catalyst. We're still very committed to it as BII, and we're actually today at $1.85 billion deployed. So I'm crossing fingers that probably just after the end of the year, we're going to hit $2 billion, which will be an amazing milestone and maybe one to end, because this is really a celebration of everything that has come up to this point. So thank you, and please enjoy a drink to celebrate with us.